This week, we welcome Olesia Klevchuk, Principal Product Marketing Manager at Barracuda, to discuss the latest social engineering tactics and the growing complexity of attacks. In the Leadership and Communications section, what the newly signed U.S. Cyber Incident Law means for security, how to plan for increased security risk resulting from the Great Resignation, the 5 pillars of growth, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Account takeovers, malicious campaigns, impersonation, and data breaches are on the rise, driven by the pandemic and security challenges of a remote workforce. The number one most common attack vector in breaches is compromised credentials. Constella Intelligence protects your key employees from digital risk by continuously monitoring the deep, dark, and surface web for exposed credentials, detecting threats that others miss with real-time alerts to protect you and your company from a targeted attack. Try it free at securityweekly.com/Constella. Endpoint security is designed to protect every device in your fleet, wherever it may be. These days, that can be a lot of different places. Find out how HP Wolf Security uses emerging strategies like application isolation, along with a zero-trust approach and framework to give you a powerful, manageable, usable solution to your growing and increasingly spread-out security challenges. Learn how HP Wolf Security can make a difference across your endpoints at securityweekly.com/HP Wolf. Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Legacy GRC systems cannot support the powerful, real-time automation and oversight that organizations require to take risks that matter to succeed. CyberSync continuous control automation ingests data from the IT GRC stack to update controls against regulatory requirements and risks in real time, delivering insights and visibility. See how members of the Fortune 500 are saving millions annually by visiting securityweekly.com/CyberSync.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 255, recorded March 21st, 2022. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado for 2 more shows. That's it, 2 more shows in Colorado, and then it's off to Texas. Joining remotely are my co-hosts for this afternoon. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque. Welcome, Jason.
Hey there, Matt. Great to be here. Lots of action in the NFL, like we were talking about earlier, and March Madness. And my son working with me on some brackets. So, so paying attention to March Madness.
Definitely some madness going on. The Texas Tech won yesterday because my son's at Texas Tech, so we were watching the game. And they pulled it out against Notre Dame late. But, yeah, it's been some interesting games already this last weekend.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And filling in again for Mr. Ben Carr. Ben's got a new job, so when you get a new job as a CISO, you get a little busy. So he's missed the last couple of weeks. Stepping in again for him is Mr. Tyler Robinson. Welcome, Tyler.
Thanks for having me again. It's big shoes to fill, but I'll fill them when he needs.
Good. Join us April 14th to learn how to monitor your Wi-Fi networks for attacks with Enzyme, a free and open source wireless intrusion detection system with Lennart Koopman, hosted by Larry Pesce and Paul Asadorian. Then join Alan Stalaskis and host Tyler Robinson and Paul Asadorian on April 21st to learn how to gain visibility into your enterprise with Sysmon. Live attendees at both of these webcasts will have the chance to win a $100 Hacker Warehouse gift card. Register at securityweekly.com/webcast. And don't forget to check out our entire library of on-demand webcasts by visiting securityweekly.com/on-demand. This segment is sponsored by Barracuda. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Olesia Klevchuk is Principal Product Marketing Manager for Email Security at Barracuda Networks. In her role, she focuses on defining how organizations can protect themselves against advanced email threats, spear phishing, and account takeover. Prior to Barracuda, Olesia worked in email security, brand protection, and IT research. Olesia, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So it's a pleasure to have you. So you did some research around spear phishing and email attacks. And we're going to talk a little bit today about the results and some best practices based on the research. But before we get into the results, I always like to understand kind of the hypothesis for the research and the approach that you took to launch the research, because having a research division here at Cyber Risk Alliance that reports into me, I see a lot of our research. I help craft our research. So I'm always curious how other people approach their research studies. So I'd love to understand the background behind the research.
Sure. So what we tried to do here is we were very interested in looking at highly targeted email attacks. So what we've seen in the security space over the past few years is that the landscape has really changed, and this kind of spam and malware attacks have been around for a very long time, and they're still around today. But we wanted to focus on this new wave of social engineering attacks, and we wanted to understand how do hackers use social engineering tactics to bypass some of the security mechanisms that we already have put in place to protect ourselves and our organizations against a more traditional type of attack, such as a malware and spam. So that's why we're doing this type of research. The way we're doing this is by looking at the attacks that have actually bypassed the email gateways and some of the filters that designed to block more traditional type of threats. And we're using the data that we have seen from protecting thousands and thousands of our customers, and looking at the different targeted social engineering attacks, spear phishing attacks, business email compromise that are getting through, and that might be landing in the users' inboxes, the volume of them, the severity of them, and the tactics that hackers are using.
So you're using data from your existing customers to analyze different attack vectors. Did you augment it then with customer data, or is this pure based on what Barracuda saw coming through your data?
Yeah, this is all based on what we are seeing among our customer base. So we have tens of thousands of customers, millions of mailboxes, and that we are monitoring every single day. And this is all based on the attacks that we are seeing, different types of threats that we are seeing targeting organizations around the world, in North America, in Europe, in Asia Pacific, different types of industries, also all sizes organizations as well. So this is pretty good representation of what the threat landscape looks like today when it comes to social engineering attacks.
Got it. So what are some of the big findings out of the research? Now, I went through the research report. I have a couple areas I want to dig into, but from your perspective, what were some of the interesting findings out of the data that you were able to analyze?
Yeah, so there were a couple of things that we found. The first one, I think that is most interesting, is the account takeover and how prevalent account compromise is among organizations. We have found that 1 in 5 organizations would have had at least one account compromised in the past 12 months. And a lot of these organizations probably had more than one account compromised. So if you think about it, that's a lot of kind of real estate for hackers to go and start spreading internally, using those legitimate accounts to target employees within the organization or target organizations' partners and customers. This is a very kind of difficult attack to detect, and we are seeing an increase in number of compromised accounts that are out there.
So compromised accounts, first thing I think of is multi-factor authentication, right? We'll talk about best practices later, but does that mean we're not deploying multi-factor authentication? So even if I had a compromised credential and I use multi-factor authentication, I potentially would render that taken over account useless. So if there is a compromise and they're using those credentials, does that mean we're still not where we need to be with multi-factor authentication?
Yeah, well, multi-factor authentication is incredibly important. And it's, if your organization is not using multi-factor authentication today, then what are you waiting for? You have to implement it today. It really will take care of majority of the problems. But we are not in that place today. Most organizations still don't have multi-factor authentication because they have an increased kind of risk of having an account compromised. And at the same time, even if you do have multi-factor authentication in place, it's not always a silver bullet. Hackers know how it works, and they are able to bypass it. Sometimes they are logging into your account if they have stolen your login credentials, and you get this ping on your phone that is asking you to authenticate the login, and you'll be surprised how many users will actually approve that, and the hackers inside. In addition to that, hackers are getting really clever with how they are able to get inside those accounts. So some of the attacks that we're seeing was incredibly sophisticated in the way they're trying to bypass this multi-factor authentication. In one case, attackers are sending in a phishing attack that is, for example, will ask you to log into your Office 365 account to check the status of email, or your mailbox is full, or there's some kind of security alert. You go in, you log in, you're seeing a landing page that is actually Microsoft's landing page, and you're logging into your account. But what you don't see is that there is a token inserted into the URL, and what you're actually doing is not logging into your account, but you're providing your account credentials and then approving access for hackers to your account. So you're basically giving an permission to hackers app to log into your account. So even if you change your password, even if you authenticate your login with a two-factor authentication, hackers don't need your actual login credentials. They have access bypassing all of those security measures.
Yeah. So luckily we have a resident hacker.
That concerns me, coupled with... Oh, go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say we have a resident hacker, but I'll let you go first.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that concerns me, because another one of the findings that you have is that C-level executives are the main targets of these account takeovers, right? And when you talk about folks who have the keys to the castle in your organization, I'm looking at the hit list here: CEO, CFO, HR was in there, and then accounting and finance. I mean, that's some high-level executives with a lot of information, a lot of intellectual property, and a lot of keys to the castle that are extremely concerning.
Yeah, and they definitely are the number one targets among hackers for exactly that reason. They have a lot of data, and they also have a lot of authority, right, within the organization. So if the hacker is using their account to move laterally within the organization, they can do that. They can send a request to CFO for a wire transfer. They can send a request to an IT department to give them access to some important information, to some databases that they can then have a direct access to and really wreak havoc within the organization. So everybody is vulnerable, but C-level accounts are the ones that hackers are the most interested in, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and no size organization is safe, right? I'm really interested in one of the findings that you had about small businesses versus large organizations when it comes to that it's volume attack versus per mailbox attack. I was astounded at the percentage increase of small businesses when you look at it from that per mailbox attack, right? I think the number was 350% more likely if you're a small business, a business with less than 100 employees, of that type of an attack. That was an eye-opener right there, let me tell you.
Yeah, and it is a surprising finding on one hand, but because you expect hackers and attackers to be more interested in the large organizations because they have more resources, they have more money there, they're more likely to have a larger payout. But at the same time, they probably are also a harder target for hackers as well. Small organizations, they do have fewer security resources. A lot of them don't even have a dedicated security department. They don't invest as much in various technologies that will help them prevent potential attacks or even recover and overcome breaches if they were to occur. So hackers they know that. So they know that this could be an easy target, and you can target 5, 10, 15 small organizations and have a smaller payouts, but it's much easier to penetrate and trick users within those organizations than there would be within the large enterprises.
Yeah. And we're all part of the supply chain, right? No matter how large or small our organization is, we're part of that overall supply chain. So it's important to focus on that, and you quoted a Cyber Ventures statistic about 60% of small businesses will close their doors within 6 months of a breach. We've talked about it on this show. There's so many unfortunate events where, organizations will bring us in to assist, and they're having to make the hard, decision of whether or not they shutter the doors because of an incident that occurred. So it's real, and no size organization is immune to it.
For sure. And, for small organizations, losing the data. So if you think about the ransomware attack and being victim of one, for a small organization, losing the data a lot of the time equals losing the business. Large organizations are more likely to recover from the loss of the data than the small organizations would. So small organizations in some ways are more likely to pay out, even if the ransom is that they're going to pay out is smaller. There is a higher chances of them doing that. And not having ransomware insurance, for example, is another kind of problem there, right?
So Jason, I pulled out the exact same stat, right? The SMB, and I assume it's just limited budgets and resources to respond. But to your point, it's also a vehicle through third-party relationships to get into bigger organizations. And I think that's the other potential concern I took out of this is SMBs are targets to get to larger organizations because they might have a relationship with a larger organization and use their credentials to get into a larger enterprise. And it's lower hanging fruit potentially for them to go after the SMBs.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed. Again, it's trying to find the weakest link, and in many instances, that small to medium business that's part of the supply chain of a larger organization is the weakest link.
I am curious how do you go about protecting organizations? Because breaking into organizations all the time, like that's one of the hard things about what we do is offering something that actually represents a meaningful change within inside these organizations. A lot of places have good MFA, and like you said, we either trick users into signing into our MFA and proxying those credentials through, or getting them to click accept. Both of those are technological controls that are in place, but we're still able to get past that. So they say user awareness training. Most of my sites look good. They've got good certs. The names probably match. In fact, I may even use a Microsoft site to do it. So we can't really train them to do that. They've got good DMARC. We've got incident response. So what is the kind of the answer to help these SMBs get past some of this?
Well, there's a number of things that they can do. The first thing is, the reason why they're still being targeted is because if you think about an email, anybody can send an email to anyone from anywhere. It's kind of the easiest way to get inside the organization. You don't need to hack anything to send an email. You can create a Gmail account and you can send an email, and if you get a response, that's your lead. And the way organizations need to look at it, regardless of their size, is to make sure that they have a robust email security in place and all of the measures. It's not that you're a small organization, you're less likely to be a target of an attack. You're not. In fact, you are more likely to be a target of a small, if you're a small organization. So the way organizations can look at it is to kind of think about it in the buckets. The first one is to make sure that you have all of the technology in place to prevent all types of email threats that are out there. You have your spam and malware, which probably make up around 90% of the attacks. And then the rest is difficult. And you need to make sure that you have technology in place that is not relying on kind of traditional filters and signatures and looking at bad IPs, because that's no longer sufficient for modern day attacks. So you want to prevent as much as you can before it gets inside your organization, for the mails that delivered inside the organization. The second one, you want to focus on kind of detection and response. And as you mentioned, security awareness is part of it, right? So you want to make sure that your users are part of your kind of detection and response practice in some way. So they're able to identify attacks or suspicious messages, and they're able to forward them to your IT department. And your IT department has all the necessary tools in place to be able to evaluate that and respond as quickly as possible. Because the quicker you can respond to potential threats that did get through, the less risk of it spreading throughout the organization. And then finally, you need to have in place some kind of a response and an ability to protect your data as well. So what happens if the breach did happen? Do you have a plan for that? Do you know what happens to your data? Is it secure enough? Can you recover quickly? Can you continue working if the breach happened? Do you have everybody in your organization? Do they all understand what they need to do in the case of a security breach?
Yeah, you jumped ahead to where I was going to go, because because there was one other finding in the research that I thought was interesting that ties into some of the recommendations around protections, and that was this trend around conversation hijacking. Talk about that finding, because I think it's really interesting. Are they using that as one of the ways to bypass multi-factor authentication? Like, what are the different kind of conversation hijacking trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, conversation hijacking is a very interesting attack, and it's the one that we find in the very small numbers. And the reason we find them in the small numbers is because they're incredibly complex in the way that they're put together, but they're also incredibly effective. So they do require quite a bit of homework from an attacker, and it combines multiple different tactics or multiple different ways that hackers are kind of putting this attack together. The way it works is that an attacker will take over an account and then sit within that account and look at business conversation that takes place. So who's talking to whom, what kind of business dealings are happening. So think about an organization and a vendor having a conversation going back and forth and about various invoices being paid out and goods being or services being delivered. So the hackers has access to this conversation. They take this conversation and they try to take it outside of the organization. So what they do, they'll, let's say, a vendor is Barracuda Network. So they'll go and they'll register an account and domain with Barracuda with 3 R's, for example. It's really difficult to detect that. It's a new domain. They send an email from that domain saying, hey, you owe us some money for the services we have provided. Here is an invoice with the new account details. Please pay up. This is a really clever way of trying to get the money out of the victims, because they have a history of communication. They know that the money are owed. Sometimes they know how much money they're owed. They know all the parties involved. And because this conversation is taken outside of the organization that they are trying to scam, it's actually becomes really difficult sometimes to detect this attack. And we're actually seeing a huge increase in the number of conversation hijacking over the past year. And the reason why we're seeing this, I think, is because they are so successful. They're difficult to put together, but the payouts can be pretty substantial.
Yeah, so is this a way to get around business email? Is this a form of business email compromise? Because you're hijacking the conversation and then using that as a way to potentially then perpetrate an email compromise and get money out on the other side?
Yeah, and it is in some ways, and that's what I was kind of saying earlier. They combining different tactics. So it is a business email compromise in the sense that they're trying to get the money out of the organization, but it's also kind of a domain impersonation attack or an employee impersonation attack, account takeover attack, because all of those things are combined to create a single attack. And we're seeing more and more attackers using various techniques to get the money out. But their goal is always money. That's what they want at the end of the day. They're always looking to get money out of the victims.
Yeah. And the solution, I think, is a combination of technologies, people, and process, right? Because, I've had the experience where we've had people raise their hand before an issue takes place, and they realize something's happening, right? They realize that, hey, wait a minute, I have an invoice that I just got, but something just doesn't look right, right? And they're raising their hand, or technologies. But I think it's a combination of all of it. If you have the right processes in place for approvals, right? We've had a CFO who designed approval processes for payout or wire transfers or things of that nature, where you have to go through an approval process, and that's where they're sniffing out bad behavior. So, I think it's all of the above: technologies, the people, and then have good stopgap processes in place.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where on best practices, I was looking at the policy section. To your point, Jason, exactly, right? I need to have procedures in place that create checks and balances, because technology by itself is not going to solve this. If there's ways to take the conversation off network, none of my controls are in place, or other aspects of the attack, procedure has to be kind of that last check and balance. Otherwise, you don't mitigate these attacks.
That's right. Yeah, and again, if you have that right process in play, it gives you the ability to have, someone say, wait a minute, this is not how this customer typically interacts with us. They'll never ask for a wire transfer. Why? Why are we doing it this way? They have ACH or they have something else built with us already. And it just allows you to sniff out odd behavior.
Yep, exactly. Olesia, any other lessons learned for recommendations for listeners out there?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of adding to that policy discussion, it is very important, and it has to be part of, you almost like you use education training. So you educate your users, but you also need to put in place, policies around wire transfers. How do you request them? If somebody requests to change kind of the payroll details, which account to deposit their salaries in, and it shouldn't be done over email. Or if it is, there has to be some kind of check as a follow-up to that request. If you're executive within the organization or a manager within an organization asks you to buy some gift cards, you shouldn't just run out and go buy them. There has to be some policies in place whenever the monies are involved, that they are double checked. Pick up a phone, call them, walk over to their office, ask them if that's exactly what they wanted to happen. And overall, the security education is really important. Like, we talked a lot about these attacks that we don't see a lot of, like conversation hijacking, account takeover. They're kind of a lot of the time they're not very visible to individuals. But you need to make sure that your users are aware of this type of threats, not just don't click on links, which is very important to educate users not to click on links that they are unsure about. But in addition to that, what happens if you did click on the link, or what kind of requests should you be wary about? So educating them about the recent type of attacks and the newer type of threats is very important. And in addition to that, there's so many other technologies out there to protect against this kind of threats. And a lot of us have invested in email gateways to filter attacks that are coming in and out. But a lot of the time that might not be enough anymore, because the attacks have evolved. So should your security. So try to figure out a more dedicated type of technologies, ones they're using, for example, machine learning, as a way to prevent attacks getting inside the users' inboxes.
Yes, agreed. I've seen enough of those gift card attacks from my CEO, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Olesia, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thank you for having me here.
If you want to learn more about Barracuda or how to protect yourself from spear phishing attacks, please visit securityweekly.com/Barracuda. We'll take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.